We have two very distinguished speakers for today's inaugural lectures. One, I think both of you have already met. Professor Sarukai, I think, has not been able to meet you so far. I will just briefly introduce them. But before I introduce, I invite Professor Nalapat and Professor Sarukai to come and sit here. As you, many of you are aware that the topics which we have chosen for today's inaugural lectures, one is on India's role in global affairs, and the second is philosophy behind getting educated. And these two talks basically are going to be a part of the inaugural lectures for our study abroad program. Professor M.D.Nalapat is a well-known member of strategic and academic community, and his works mainly on China and Pakistan have been well studied by the rest of the world. And some of the views which he has are very interesting to hear from him. He also has founded our Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. He holds a UNESCO Peace Chair at our department, and he is our mentor. Professor Sarukai is currently the director of Manipal Center for Philosophy and Humanities. And he again, in fact, you will hear him, you will come to know that he has really very interesting ideas on philosophy and many other issues which, in fact, impacts the society largely. So I think I request Professor Nalapat to deliver his speech.
Thank you, Arvind. You know, I come from a state called Kerala. And in Kerala, we call it Kera means coconuts. So we've got a lot of coconut palms in Kerala. And the beauty of the coconut palm is that you don't do very much. You know, the coconut grows in the tree, and if they don't fall of their own volition, somebody goes up, picks it, and comes down. It's a pretty lazy, relaxed lifestyle. I've given a lecture in the morning. I had 2-3 meetings in the Manipal, and I'm feeling, frankly, a little overworked, Ginny. But, you know, for my Kerala standards, because we normally work about 40 minutes a day, it's a bit more than that here. So I'm obviously going on to global standards. Well, as I said, I'm very happy that you're here, very happy that it's raining, and very glad that to see this group here. Arvind has suggested that I talk about India and India's role in world affairs, etc., all these different things. I think it's important to realize that with the kind of travel restrictions that have been abandoned through globalization. If you remember long back in the past, not even very long ago, before till around just before the Second World War, visas were almost unknown, and people could travel more or less where they liked. Before the First World War, in the last century, travel was very, very free as between frontiers. It's only after the Second World War, I think with the Iron Curtain coming on Eastern Europe and various other situations turning out, that travel between borders became much more difficult. Now, through globalization, once again we are having a situation which prevailed in the past, and travel between borders is getting easy. Why I'm saying that is that it's not simply a question of different countries interacting with each other. It's not a question of India and the United States, for example, interacting with each other. It's about Indians and Americans interacting with each other. It's about people of different countries interacting with each other. So one has, in a sense, to disaggregate the national influence into individuals, because that is extremely important. It's not just country to country, but it's people to people, and almost in a sense sometimes person to person. So I'd like you to understand that definitely in democracies and actually anywhere in the world, a country as such is a collection of human beings, and each human being is in a sense a country with its own policy, its own trajectory, its own life cycle, etc. And each human country has its impact on relations. This is particularly so in relations between the United States and India, because, you know, in contrast to the United States-China relationship, now, I'm not going to go back in the distant past, what happened during Chiang Kai-shek, the missionaries there, and, you know, General Stilwell. Let's go after communism came to China in 1949. There was a very huge disconnect between the US and China geopolitically, especially after the Korean War, and certainly after the massive military assistance provided to North Vietnam in the Vietnamese War. That ended in the 1970s. Through Nixon, through Kissinger, through various other steps, and the US and China became strategic allies. But the US-China relationship is a top-down relationship. That is, President Nixon goes to China, meets Chairman Mao. Kissinger talks to Zhou Enlai. So from the top down, it slowly started percolating to different levels of the people, different levels of the economy, different levels of society, in the case of China and the United States. In the case of India and the US, it's a bottom-up relationship. It's basically tens of thousands of Indians coming here, tens of thousands of Americans, Indians going to the US, and tens of thousands of Americans coming to India. So, in a sense, it's a much more organic and natural relationship than a relationship that's been imposed from the top. As a result, now I'll give you a simple example. Let's talk about the 1960s. The 1960s were a period which I'm not sure that the majority of this class was even a concept in the 1960s. But I'd like to say that the reality is the 1960s were very important for us because that was the turning point in our agriculture. That was the turning point when we had a century and a half of famine in India. The last major famine in India was in 1943, 1944, in which on paper 7 million people died. The actual number of people could be very much more. In just the one state of Bihar, 7 million people died in the 43-44 famine that was during the Second World War. A huge amount of people have died in famines in India over the previous century and a half. The 1960s was a period it was reversed, and I would like to say it could not have been reversed without, I would not say the assistance of the United States, but I would say the assistance of Americans. This could not have been reversed. We had hundreds of American experts coming to India. Hundreds of them coming here, working in the agricultural universities, working in the farms, trying to help us improve technology, talking in terms of better seeds, better planting methods, and as a result we had the so-called Green Revolution. In fact, Arvind, I went on a kind of a nostalgia trip to the US in 1992, I remember. And the entire purpose of the trip was to identify 3 people who had been working in India in the 1960s and who had basically done an amazing amount of help to Indian agriculture. As an Indian citizen, I wanted to go there and just, as we do in Asia, we pay our respects to people who have been good to us. I couldn't, unfortunately, locate 2 of them, but one of them I did locate, and that was in the wilds of Arkansas. Arkansas was a pretty wild place in those days. When Clinton was about to be president. And I've seen some pretty bad poverty there. I've seen some huge rural poverty, etc. But I tracked this gentleman down. And he was extremely happy to see me. And we spent not 1 hour, not 2 hours, but 2 days we spent. There was a hotel, there's a place called Jonesboro in Arkansas. And there was a motel kind of thing there. So I stayed there for 2 days. I kept on talking with this gentleman for about 2 days, and we discussed how he was there in the 1960s, what used to happen, his exasperation with Indians, exasperation with Americans, with himself, the whole works. It was a fantastic experience for me because these are the people who made a huge difference to us. And I think we as Indians ought to recognize that. I'm not saying the United States record has been uniformly good. Certainly the United States government record has not been uniformly good, for the reverse. But the record of Americans in India has often been extremely different. The record of Americans in terms of innovation, the record of Americans in terms of giving us new ideas, in improving our agriculture, improving our productivity, moving into services, software, etc., has been amazing. And that has been very transformative. And I would like to think that the same situation is now taking place with India and the United States. With Indian researchers going there, people going there, experts in various fields, medicine, XYZ, and making a real difference in research and other activities in the United States. You have some Nobel Prizes won by Indians in the United States. You have a large number of patents which have been won by Indians in the United States, Indian Americans in the United States. And I'd like to think this is a two-way process. What I'm trying to tell you is that the relationship between these 2 countries should not be viewed, unlike the US-China relationship, as basically a state-to-state relationship, as basically a government-to-government relationship. And most of us, as so-called scholars of geopolitics and scholars of Indo-American relations, we have fallen into a trap of viewing our relations through the prism of state-to-state. Now, let me divert a little bit and say, for example, Indian experts in the US, if you look at so-called Indian experts in the US, most of them are basically experts in conflict resolution between India and Pakistan. About 80% of the Indian experts in the US are not concerned about Indian agriculture, community development, health, education, society, or any such thing. They are concentrating overwhelmingly on one single issue, which is India's relationship with Pakistan, with Kashmir, with the whole situation that comes into that, and how to solve it, etc. Now that's fine. But the point is, if you had Indian experts on America, and we put all our concentration on the US relationship with, let's say, Cuba, or the US relationship with, let's say, even the Soviet Union, it would be missing out a huge amount of the United States. It will be missing out the United States of art, of culture, of so many things which are so very important and which are not covered by a mere study of the relationship between the United States as a country and the Soviet Union as it existed then as a country. So this has been a problem of scholarship of India in the US. That scholarship has concentrated on the prism of India-Pak relations, has concentrated on the prism of conflict resolution. And as a result, almost all these scholars missed out on the broad changes that have been taking place, not only in India, but in the India-American relationship. This flow of tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and now millions of people on both sides, that is Indians going there, Americans coming here, this vast flow has almost been completely ignored by scholarship in the United States on India-America relationships. And these days it's a little more prevalent. For the last 7 or 8 years, there's been little more attention to other issues, but the concentration has been on India-Pak relations on conflict. I'm not saying it's not important, but it may be 10 or 15% of the reality. 85% is different. 85%, for example, is Indian society. How is Indian society transforming itself? Now, you have the Chinese example of transformation from the top, transformation by the Communist Party. You have the Indian example of transformation through the ballot box. Now, I'd encourage the students here who come from the US to look at, for example, the example of Uttar Pradesh, or the example of Bihar, the state where Professor Arvind Kumar comes in. In Arvind's state, in the year in which you guys were born, if you were a Yadav, that is a so-called backward class, you were not allowed into the balcony of Arvind's grandfather's house. Arvind's grandfather's house, you would not be allowed into the balcony or into the veranda or the portico of his house. You had to wait outside the gate of the house and converse. Such was the degree of class segregation, of caste segregation. Soon after that, what happened? Because of the power of the ballot box and because of the numerical strength of the so-called backward class, the backward caste started coming to power in elections. They started getting people elected. And lo and behold, they came to power. Bihar had a chief minister from the backward class, Mr. Lalu Prasad Yadav. The same caste that could not, in a sense, it's transformative. It's as transformative in UP, not as maybe, but much less. But definitely, like Barack Obama being elected President of the United States, it's a transformative event that had a huge impact on society in India, in the north, and in the Hindi belt, where caste was very, very strong. It's not only in Bihar. In Uttar Pradesh, you have what's called the Dalits. The Dalits were supposed to be at the very bottom of the social pyramid, and today you have a Dalit chief minister, Mayawati, and she's quite an effective chief minister, and I think she has fairly good control over her state, and she certainly runs her state very efficiently and very effectively. What I'm saying is that this process has taken place through the ballot box. This is social change through the ballot box. It's not a complete social change. We still have a lot of problems, we still have a lot of prejudices, we have a lot of issues, but still, nevertheless, it is a significant social change that has taken place in India over the last few decades, and it has taken place through the democratic process and through the pressure of mass voting in a democracy, and that mass voting leading to changes in the composition of legislatures, composition of